My name is Evan Hale, and if you asked me what the worst thing my family ever did to me, I wouldn't say it was about money, at least not in the straightforward way of theft or embezzlement. No, the real damage came from something far more insidious. They convinced me that I was the hero in their story, the generous son stepping up to help, when all along I was just the unwitting pawn in their quiet scheme. It wasn't a grand conspiracy with secret meetings or forged documents. It was a slow erosion of boundaries, built on guilt, gratitude, and the unbreakable ties of blood. And it all centered around a simple lake house that I once thought would be my sanctuary. At 34, I had carved out a decent life for myself, nothing extravagant or headline-worthy. I wasn't the type to chase luxury cars or high-rise condos. I worked remotely as a logistics analyst for a mid-sized shipping company, crunching numbers on supply chains, optimizing routes, and ensuring that packages got from point A to point B without unnecessary delays. It was steady work, the kind that paid the bills and left me with enough flexibility to design my own schedule. No micromanaging boss breathing down my neck, just me, my laptop, and a reliable Wi-Fi connection. That freedom was what allowed me to make the leap 5 years ago. I bought a modest lake house in northern Michigan, nestled deep in the Upper Peninsula, surrounded by towering pine trees that whispered in the wind and a glassy expanse of water that stretched out like a mirror to the sky. The house itself was unassuming. A 2-bedroom cabin with weathered cedar siding, a small kitchen that smelled faintly of pine sap, and a living room dominated by a stone fireplace that I rarely used. Out back, a narrow wooden dock extended into the lake, creaking underfoot as it bobbed gently with the waves. It wasn't a vacation mansion, there were no granite countertops or smart home gadgets. But it was mine, purchased with savings I'd scraped together over years of careful budgeting. I envisioned it as a temporary retreat, a place to escape the grind of city life, to sit on that dock with a fishing rod in hand, letting the quiet solitude wash away the stress of deadlines and conference calls. It was supposed to be my thinking spot, my reset button, a haven where I could recharge without the distractions of the world. But then, as these things often do, family got involved. My parents, Frank and Janice Hale, had always been the hard-working types, the kind who prided themselves on scraping by without handouts. Dad had spent most of his career in manufacturing, operating heavy machinery in a factory that churned out auto parts for decades. But in his late 50s, the layoffs hit hard. The plant downsized, and he was one of the casualties, left adrift in a job market that didn't value experience as much as youth and tech savvy. He tried odd jobs here and there, driving for a delivery service, fixing up neighbors' cars in the garage, but nothing stuck. Mom, ever the resilient one, patched together an income through seasonal gigs, waitressing at a local diner in the summers, clerking at a holiday gift shop in winter, even tutoring kids in math after school. They weren't on the streets or begging for charity, but the anxiety was always there, lurking in their conversations like a shadow. Bills piled up, unexpected repairs drained their savings, and retirement seemed like a distant dream they might never reach. When they first heard about the lake house, I mentioned it casually during a family dinner. They lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Evan, that's wonderful," Mom said, her eyes sparkling with what I mistook for genuine pride. "But you shouldn't leave it sitting empty all the time. It's such a waste of a beautiful spot." Dad nodded vigorously, leaning back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "Yeah, son, let us look after it for you. We could check on things, make sure the pipes don't freeze in winter, maybe even do some minor upkeep. It'd give us something to do, and we'd be helping you out." I hesitated at first. The place was my private escape, after all. But their enthusiasm wore me down, and against my better judgment, that quiet inner voice that whispered warnings I chose to ignore, I handed over a spare key. In the beginning, it all seemed perfectly fine, even beneficial. They'd drive up once or twice a month, spending a weekend airing out the rooms, mowing the small patch of lawn, or just sitting on the porch with coffee, watching the loons glide across the water. Sometimes my younger brother Caleb would tag along. He was in his late 20s then, still figuring out his path, bouncing between community college classes and part-time jobs at a hardware store. I'd get photos texted to me, the three of them grinning by the dock, or a shot of the lake at sunset with a caption like, "Thanks for the getaway, bro." I covered all the costs, of course, the property taxes that crept up each year, the utility bills for electricity and water, the insurance premiums to protect against floods or fires, even the occasional dock repairs when winter ice took its toll. It added up, but I didn't mind. They thanked me profusely every time, their voices thick with appreciation. "You're a lifesaver, Evan," Mom would say. "We don't know what we'd do without you." In hindsight, those thanks came a little too often, a little too rehearsed, like they were laying groundwork for something more. 2 years passed like that, a comfortable routine that lulled me into complacency. Then my job threw a curveball. A promotion to senior analyst, with better pay and more responsibility, but it required relocating to the company's headquarters in Denver. The remote setup had been great, but this role demanded in-person collaboration, team meetings, and access to the main office's resources. I weighed my options carefully, crunching numbers on spreadsheets late into the night. Selling the lake house made sense. It would free up capital for a down payment on something in Colorado, maybe a condo in the suburbs with mountain views. I broached the idea with my parents over a video call, expecting support or at least understanding. Their reaction caught me off guard. Mum's face hardened instantly, her usual warm smile vanishing. "You're not selling it," she said flatly, as if stating an unarguable fact. Dad chuckled at first, but it was forced, laced with an edge I hadn't heard before. "Come on, Evan, it's family property now," he added, half joking but with a seriousness in his eyes that made my stomach twist. "We've put time into it, made memories there. You can't just uproot that." Caleb, who was in the background, muttered something about it being our spot too. I laughed it off at the time, assuming it was just sentimentality, an attachment to the place that had given them a break from their worries. But that conversation lingered in my mind like a splinter, a subtle warning sign I should have heeded. In the end, I decided to keep the lake house, rent it out occasionally maybe, and made the move to Denver, packing my life into boxes and starting fresh in a new city. What I didn't realize, as I settled into my apartment with its view of the Rockies and dove headfirst into the demands of my new position, was that back in Michigan, my family was constructing something entirely different. While I was building a career, forging new friendships, and adapting to the crisp mountain air, they were weaving a web of their own design, one that would eventually pull me under, revealing the quiet betrayal that had been simmering all along. It started small, with unreported visits and unmentioned changes, but it grew into something I never could have imagined. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't with a bang, but with that same familiar smile, hiding the knife behind it. The truth didn't arrive in the way I'd always imagined it would. No heated family argument, no tearful confession over the phone, no dramatic moment where someone finally broke down and admitted everything. There was no confrontation at all, no raised voices or slammed doors to mark the turning point. Instead, it slipped into my life quietly, almost politely, through an innocuous email from a complete stranger. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring, the kind of grey Denver day where the mountains disappeared behind low clouds and the air carried a damp chill that seeped through the windows of my apartment. I was winding down after a long day of meetings, scrolling through my inbox with half-hearted attention, deleting promotional junk and flagging work emails for tomorrow. That's when I saw it. A message with the subject line, "Question about dock access for July 12th event." I almost marked it as spam without opening it. Event? Dock access. It sounded like the kind of generic phishing attempt that floods inboxes every day. Someone trying to trick me into clicking a suspicious link or replying with personal information. But something made me pause. The sender's name was ordinary, Sarah Ellison, and the email address ended in a legitimate-looking domain, not the usual garbled nonsense. Curiosity won out. I clicked. The body of the email was polite, professional, even enthusiastic. Sarah explained that she was coordinating a small company retreat for a team of 12 and had been referred to Silverwater private events by a colleague who'd hosted something similar the previous summer. She had a few logistical questions. Could guests use the dock for kayaking and paddleboarding? Was there space to set up a temporary yoga platform on the lawn? Would the fire pit be available after sunset? She closed with, Looking forward to confirming dates. Your venue looks absolutely perfect. I stared at the screen for a long moment, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Venue? My venue? I had no idea what she was talking about. I'd never heard of Silverwater private events, and I certainly hadn't rented my lake house to anyone, let alone turned it into some kind of commercial retreat space. Confused, I typed back a short reply. I think there might be some confusion. What event and property are you referring to? I don't manage any venues. Her response came within minutes, as if she'd been waiting by her computer. Attached was a PDF brochure, sleek, professionally designed, with high-resolution photos that made my breath catch in my throat. There was my lake house, captured in golden hour light, the cedar siding glowing warmly, the dock stretching invitingly into calm water, the pine trees framing the scene like a postcard. Inside shots showed the living room arranged with plush throw blankets and fresh flowers on the coffee table, the kitchen stocked with wine glasses and charcuterie boards, even the spare bedroom made up with crisp white linens and decorative pillows I didn't recognize. At the top of every page, in elegant script lettering, was the logo, Silverwater Private Events. Below it, a tagline, Intimate lakefront gatherings in northern Michigan's most serene setting. I felt the room tilt slightly, like the floor had shifted under me. My hands went numb as I scrolled. The brochure laid out everything in neat, confident bullet points. Weekend wellness retreats for small groups, intimate corporate offsites and team-building escapes, micro-weddings and elopements for up to 30 guests, private family reunions or milestone celebrations, exclusive lakefront access with private dock and fire pit. There were pricing tiers too, clear, unapologetic numbers that made my pulse hammer in my ears. Weekend package, Friday-Sunday, starting at $4,200 midweek retreat, Monday-Thursday, $3,600, additional services, catering partnerships, guided kayak tours, on-site yoga instruction, photography packages. Testimonials were sprinkled throughout, glowing quotes from past guests about the peaceful atmosphere, the attentive hosts, the unforgettable sunsets. One even mentioned Frank and Janice's warm hospitality by name. My parents' names, right there, in print. They had been running this for over a year, the brochure proudly stated in small text at the bottom, established 2024. That meant it had started almost immediately after I moved to Denver, while I was still sending them checks for utilities and taxes, still believing their occasional texts about checking on the house or enjoying a quiet weekend by the water. I sat there for a long time, the PDF open on my screen, the apartment silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The nausea came in waves, not dramatic vomiting, just a deep, sickening churn in my gut, the kind that makes your skin feel too tight. This wasn't just unauthorized use of my property. This was a full-fledged business built on my investment, my deed, my name on the mortgage, operated under a name they'd invented, marketed with photos they'd staged, profiting from bookings I'd never known about. And the worst part, they'd done it all while still calling me sweetheart, still thanking me for my generosity, still letting me believe I was helping them stay afloat. That email from a stranger wasn't just the first crack in the illusion. It was the moment the entire facade began to fracture, piece by careful piece, revealing the calculated structure they'd built behind my back. I didn't call them that night. I didn't fire off an angry text or demand an immediate explanation. I didn't even log in to the county property records right away to confirm what I already knew deep down. Instead, I sat in the dark of my Denver apartment, the glow of the laptop screen the only light, and let the shock settle into something colder, sharper, more deliberate. Rage would have been cleaner. This felt like calculation. For 3 days, I did nothing visible. I went to work, joined meetings, nodded at the right times, but every free moment my mind was back on that lake, replaying the brochure images, the pricing tiers, the testimonials that praised Frank and Janice's warm hospitality. I read the PDF over and over until the words blurred. I zoomed in on the photos, searching for details I recognized. The scar on the dock railing from when I'd clumsily backed a boat trailer into it. The crooked shutter on the east window I'd never gotten around to fixing. All of it mine, all of it now branded as theirs. By the end of that first week, the nausea had turned into a strange, focused calm. I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. I needed to know how far this went, how deep the conviction ran that my property was theirs to monetize, to manage, to reimagine. I needed proof that wasn't just circumstantial. And more than that, I needed to see how they would behave when they thought no one was watching. So I played along. I created a new email address on a free provider, something bland and forgettable, like mark.thompson.eventsegmail.com. I set up a generic signature, Mark Thompson, Milestone Celebrations Coordinator. I even made a simple logo in a free online editor, a stylized champagne glass with 40 years scripted beneath it. Nothing flashy, just enough to look legitimate to someone who wasn't scrutinizing. Then, on a quiet Saturday morning, I sent the inquiry. Subject, availability inquiry, 40th anniversary celebration, 3 weeks out in the body. I described a large family gathering. 40 guests, multi-generational, arriving Friday afternoon and departing Sunday evening. I asked about full buyout of the property, catering options, whether the dock could accommodate a small evening fireworks display, knowing full well the county ordinances forbade it, and if they could recommend local vendors for live music and floral arrangements. I made the budget sound generous, mentioned flexibility on pricing for the right experience, and signed off warmly. I hit send and waited. The reply came in under an hour. It was from my mother. Her name was right there in the sender line, Janice Hale. The tone was bright, professional, almost effervescent. She thanked Mr. Thompson for his interest, expressed excitement about hosting such a meaningful milestone, and assured me that while their standard capacity was 30 guests, they had successfully accommodated slightly larger groups with careful planning. She attached an availability calendar. My house was booked solid for most of the summer, offered 2 potential weekends that could work with minor adjustments, and invited me to schedule a phone call to discuss details. She didn't recognize the fake name. Not even a flicker of hesitation. 2 days later, after a short exchange where Mark expressed enthusiasm and asked for formal paperwork to present to the family committee, she sent the contract. It was real, not some scribbled note on notebook paper, not a casual email agreement. It was a 12-page PDF, cleanly formatted, with numbered sections, liability clauses, cancellation policies, and payment schedules. The header read Silverwater Private Events in the same elegant script as the brochure. At the top of page 2, under Property Ownership and Management, it stated clearly, Silverwater Private Events is owned and operated by Frank and Janice Hale, authorized managers and exclusive booking agents for the premises located at full address of my lake house, Northern Michigan. Authorized managers, exclusive booking agents. There was a signature line at the bottom for Janice Hale, proprietor. I stared at those words longer than I'd stared at anything in my life. My pulse was steady now, no racing, no pounding, just a low, constant thrum of realization. This wasn't opportunistic squatting. This wasn't them borrowing the house for a few weekends to make ends meet. This wasn't even simple theft. They had convinced themselves, truly deeply convinced themselves, that the lake house belonged to them in every way that mattered. The language in the contract wasn't careless or evasive. It was declarative, confident, proprietary. They had built an identity around it. They had branded it, marketed it, scheduled it months in advance. They had accepted deposits, likely thousands of dollars, from strangers who believed they were dealing with legitimate owners. And somewhere along the line, my role had shifted in their minds from owner to distant benefactor, from son to silent investor who paid the bills while they ran the show. That was the moment the betrayal sharpened into something worse than financial exploitation. It became existential. They hadn't just taken my property. They had erased me from it entirely. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights glittering against the mountains. For the first time since the stranger's email had cracked everything open, I felt something approaching clarity. They didn't expect me to stay quiet. They didn't expect me to watch. And they certainly didn't expect what I was going to do next. The move they never saw coming. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a single warning shot. No angry phone call, no "how could you" text thread. I didn't even let them hear the tremor in my voice that I'd been carrying for weeks. Instead, I weaponized silence and paperwork. The very next morning after receiving my mother's contract, I opened a new browser tab and started searching for the best real estate litigation attorneys in Traverse City. By noon, I was on the phone with Rebecca Langford of Langford and Associates, a woman whose website bio read like a horror story for squatters and fraudulent managers, specializing in quiet title actions, adverse possession defense, and commercial lease disputes. Her voice was calm, almost bored, as I forwarded her the brochure, the contract, the emails, the property deed, the tax records, everything. She listened without interruption, then said the sentence that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Evan, what they've done isn't just conversion of property. It's identity-level usurpation. They have publicly declared themselves the owners in commerce. That's a slam-dunk case for slander of title, trademark infringement, and intentional interference with property rights. And the best part? We don't need to ask their permission to stop it." She never once said, "Are you sure you want to do this to your parents?" She didn't need to. The tone in her voice said, "I do this for breakfast." Phase 1 took exactly 10 days. Day 1, Rebecca filed an emergency ex parte motion with the local circuit court for a temporary restraining order against any further bookings or representations of ownership by Frank, Janice, or Caleb Hale. Granted the same afternoon. Day 2, I hired Northwoods Property Solutions, a commercial management firm out of Petoskey that handles high-end vacation rentals and corporate retreats across the northern Lower Peninsula. Their senior manager, Tom Kowalski, laughed out loud when I showed him the Silverwater website. "Oh, we know this listing," he said. "They've been undercutting our rates for a year." Happy to bury them. Day 4. Tom's locksmith, a retired sheriff's deputy with zero patience for drama, drove up to the lake house at 7 a.m., changed every lock, installed commercial-grade smart locks with time-stamped entry logs, and mounted discrete security cameras covering the dock, driveway, and both entrances. He texted me a photo of the old lock set sitting on the porch like discarded trash. Day 5. I transferred every utility, electric, water, internet, propane, out of my personal name and into a newly created LLC, Silverwater Artist Residency, LLC, a name chosen deliberately to salt the wound. The utility companies didn't ask questions when a lawyer's letter arrived citing fraudulent account usage by unauthorized parties. Day 6. Rebecca's paralegal drafted and overnighted a 12-page cease and desist letter on Heavy Cream stock, accusing them of trademark infringement. I had already filed for federal registration of Silverwater the day before. False advertising, slander of title, and unlicensed commercial activity in a residential zone. The letter gave them 72 hours to remove all online listings or face preliminary injunction. GoDaddy received their copy the same day. By evening, silverwaterevents.com returned a 404 error. Their Instagram grid went blank. Their Facebook page disappeared entirely. They finally realized something was wrong on day 7, when Mum tried to get into the house to prepare for an upcoming yoga retreat and the new code didn't work. I know this because the camera notifications lit up my phone like fireworks. 9:14 a.m., Janice Hale attempting access. 9:16 a.m., Janice pounding on the door. 9:23 a.m., Frank circling the house, peering in windows. 9:41 a.m., Caleb kicking the welcome mat so hard it flew into the hydrangeas. I watched it all live from my office in Denver, volume muted, coffee going cold in my hand. That was the moment most people would have picked up the phone and screamed. I didn't. Because I still had the final card to play, the one they genuinely never saw coming. 6 months earlier, quietly, without telling a soul, I had leased the entire property for 9 months to the Great Lakes Center for the Arts, a respected 5001c3 non-profit that runs artist residencies across Michigan. 6 rotating writers, painters, and composers at a time. Maximum occupancy, 8. Fully insured. $1,800 a month rent, paid in advance, deposited directly into an account my family had never known about. The lease had started on January 1st. They were already in residence. When my parents finally called, 3 voices shouting over each other on speakerphone, demanding to know what the hell was going on, I let it ring twice before answering. "Evan, there are strangers living in your house," Mom screamed. Armed strangers, Dad added, which was ridiculous. The only weapon on site was a ceramicist's ex-acto knife. I waited for a gap in the hysteria, then spoke in the calmest voice I'd used in years. No, Dad, there are tenants living in my house. Legal, vetted, fully insured tenants who have a signed lease with quiet enjoyment rights for the next 8 months. You're the ones who no longer belong there. Silence, the kind of silence that feels like drowning. Then Caleb, voice cracking, "You can't just kick us out like this." "I didn't kick anyone out," I said. "I simply took back what was already mine. You're welcome to visit the new website when it goes live next week, silverwaterresidency.org. Applications open March 1st. Maybe you'll get lucky and be selected for a slot." I hung up before they could respond. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment, handwritten on the stationery I'd bought my mother for her birthday 3 years ago. Inside was a single sentence in her perfect Catholic school cursive: "We never thought you'd be capable of something this cruel." I folded it neatly, slipped it into the file Rebecca labeled "evidence of emotional manipulation," and went back to work. They never saw it coming because they had spent years training themselves to believe I would never fight back. They forgot the quiet ones are the ones who plan 12 moves ahead. And I was only on move 4. The explosion didn't happen over the phone. It happened in person on a crisp Saturday morning in late April, when the ice had only just left the lake and the air still carried the sharp bite of winter's memory. My parents had driven up from downstate with a van full of folding chairs, table linens, and boxed centerpieces for a wedding they were scheduled to host that weekend. One of the last big bookings on their calendar. The bride's family was due to arrive that afternoon for rehearsal photos on the dock. Mom had even packed her proprietor apron, the one embroidered with the Silverwater logo she'd ordered in bulk. They pulled into the gravel driveway at 9:07 a.m. I know the exact time because the security camera time-stamped it, and found everything changed. New locks gleamed on the doors, commercial-grade steel that caught the morning sun. A fresh sign, professionally lettered on cedar, had been mounted beside the entrance: Silverwater Artist Residency, Great Lakes Center for the Arts Private Property, authorized access only. Standing on the porch, holding a clipboard and a steaming mug of coffee, was Dr. Elena Marquez, the residency program director. She was a calm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the unflappable demeanor of someone who had managed grants, temperamental artists, and tight budgets for decades. When my parents climbed out of the van, confused and already indignant, she greeted them politely, introduced herself, and handed over a folder containing the fully executed lease, the certificate of occupancy, and a courteous letter from my attorney explaining that any further attempts to access the property would be considered trespassing. My mother later described the moment as being hit by a freight train made of paper. Dad just stood there, mouth opening and closing, holding a box of fairy lights that suddenly felt ridiculous in his hands. Within hours, the cancellations poured in. 3 weddings, one of them a $9,000 package with custom floral arches and a catered rehearsal dinner. 2 corporate retreats for mid-sized tech companies out of Grand Rapids, each with deposits already banked. A wellness weekend for a yoga collective that had prepaid in full. Total lost revenue, just over $17,000 in non-refundable deposits alone. Not counting the reputation damage when frantic brides and confused HR managers started asking questions that my parents could no longer answer. They blamed me, of course. Who else was there? The calls started that same afternoon. First Caleb, voice thick with fury: "You think you're some big-shot lawyer now? You changed the locks while we were on our way. That's low, Evan, real low." He threatened to show up with bolt cutters and make a scene the artists would never forget. I let him rant, then quietly informed him that the property was now monitored 24/7 and that any damage would be prosecuted. He hung up swearing. Then came Mum's turn, tears, the full arsenal. She left voicemails that grew progressively more desperate. "How could you do this to your own mother? We only wanted to make something beautiful out of that house. You never used it anyway. We were helping you." In one message, she sobbed that I had ripped the rug out from under their retirement dreams. Dad tried the classic guilt maneuver the next day, his voice gravelly and wounded. After everything we sacrificed for you kids, this is the thanks we get. You're breaking your mother's heart, Evan. She hasn't slept. She just sits and stares at those old photos of the lake. I finally answered on the third day, when all three of them conferenced in together, a chaotic overlap of accusation and pleading. You ruined us, Mom said, her voice cracking on the last word. I waited until they ran out of breath. No, I said as calmly as I'd practiced in the mirror. You built an entire business on property that was never yours to monetize. You signed contracts in my name, collected money under false pretenses, and represented yourselves as owners. I simply enforced the law. The ruin was self-inflicted. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that stretches until it becomes its own answer. This is where the story diverges from the revenge fantasies people expect. I didn't sue them. I thought about it. Rebecca Langford had the slander of title and interference claims drafted and ready to file. Damages would have been straightforward to prove. But every time I pictured my parents in a courtroom, grey-haired and humiliated in front of a judge, something in me recoiled. Not forgiveness exactly, just exhaustion. I didn't need their money, I needed the chapter closed. So I let the consequences do the work instead. The non-profit lease ran its full 9 months. $800 a month went straight into an account that paid for a new roof, updated plumbing, fresh staining on the cedar siding, and repairs to the dock that my family had postponed for years while pocketing event revenue. The artists were quiet, respectful, and deeply grateful for the space. One writer finished a novel there that later won a regional award. A painter held a small, invitation-only exhibition of lake-inspired watercolors. The house finally became what I had originally intended, a place of creation, not commerce. In October, with clarity rather than spite, I listed it for sale. The buyers were a semi-retired couple from Chicago, doctors who wanted a second home for their grandchildren and had no interest in the rental market. They paid asking price without negotiation. Closing took place on a snowy afternoon in early November. My parents never met them. They were never invited to the walkthrough. I moved on. The extended family found out, of course. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had attended Silverwater events and raved about Frank and Janice's charming venue. Once the documents surfaced, the cease and desist, the lease, the trademark filing, the narrative shifted. Sympathy dried up quickly when relatives realized deposits had been accepted under false ownership. Holiday gatherings grew awkward. Invitations stopped arriving. Caleb distanced himself fastest. Once he understood there would be no more family business income to skim, he moved to Florida for a warehouse job and changed his phone number. We haven't spoken since. My parents aged visibly in those months. Mom took a part-time cashier position at a craft store. Dad sold his old fishing boat to cover credit card debt they'd racked up buying event supplies. They still live in the same modest house downstate, but the lake photos came down from the walls. We don't speak now, not out of burning hatred. Not because I wake up angry every morning, but because trust, once converted into a revenue stream, once branded, marketed, and monetized without consent, cannot be bought back with apologies or tears. Some currencies are non-refundable. The lake house belongs to new people now. I live in a small loft downtown Denver, close enough to the mountains to hike on weekends. And on quiet evenings, when the wind rattles the windows, I no longer feel the old pull northward. Some doors, once locked, stay that way for good reason. Some people don't see generosity as kindness. They see it as opportunity, an opening to take more, to ask for more, to expect more without ever intending to give anything back. They mistake openness for weakness, and they hover around it like it's an invitation to help themselves. I used to believe that if you gave freely and from the heart, people would naturally respond with gratitude, or at least respect. Experience has shown me otherwise. There are those who view every act of generosity as a loophole, a chance to extract whatever they can while offering nothing in return. And sometimes the strongest boundary isn't confrontation, it's finality. It's not the heated argument, the raised voices, or the long explanations that finally protect you. It's the quiet, irreversible decision to end it. No more access, no more explanations, no more chances. Confrontation can feel powerful in the moment, but it often keeps the door cracked open, feeding drama and resentment. Finality closes the door completely. It's clean, it's peaceful, it preserves your energy and your sanity by removing the source of the drain altogether. I don't own a lake house anymore. That house used to represent everything I thought I wanted. Quiet weekends on the water, the sound of waves against the dock, a place to escape and recharge. It was beautiful on the surface, sunsets over the lake, friends gathered around the fire pit. But it also became a magnet for the kind of people who saw my generosity as an endless resource. Over time, the joy faded under the weight of unspoken obligations and one-sided expectations. But I sleep better now than I ever did when I owned it. No more waking up at 3 a.m., wondering if someone is taking advantage. No more quiet resentment building over unreciprocated favors. Letting it go lifted a burden I didn't fully recognize until it was gone. True peace doesn't come from holding on to symbols of success. It comes from releasing what no longer serves you, even when it once felt like a dream. These days, my nights are deep and calm, and that simple, undisturbed rest feels like the greatest luxury of all.